Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the Hindu analysis with the first news article that focuses on an extremely interesting topic that we don't really talk about a lot in India when it comes to policy making. The article here is about India's potential in the geospatial sector. This is a sector which allows the private companies to enter into a very new kind of a market. That is, mapping India's topography, making high resolution maps of different parts of the country, and making sure that those maps are used by different companies and organizations according to their need. Usually, because of the concern of national security, this sector has been concentrated with the government of India. The government of India did not really want any private sector or private companies to enter into this field or make high resolution maps of the country and use it for commercial purposes. But just 1 year back, exactly on the 15th of Feb 2021, the government had released a new policy for geospatial sector in India that considerably deregulated the sector, meaning that it allowed a lot of private companies to participate in this sector and use this technology for commercial purposes. Now, this has been a welcome change as per the authors. The authors here in this article are trying to look back at the last 1 year and see whether or not that policy change by the government of India actually changed things on the ground or not, specifically for the companies that are working in this sector. The article here says that India fortunately has a very robust ecosystem of geospatial sector. A lot of government organizations are working in this sector, including the Survey of India that makes the official maps of the government of India and other different parts of the country. We have ISRO that sends a lot of satellites into the space specifically for the purposes of geospatial learning of India, for making topography maps of India, for weather patterns, etc. Then we have remote sensing application centers, National Informatics Center, and a lot of other ministries and departments also work together in this particular field. However, the work of these amazing organizations has not really resulted in a lot of benefit to the country's GDP. And that is mainly because all the data that is collected by these organizations is used for the government purposes, but not for commercial purposes. And that is what this policy of last year wanted to change. The authors say that not just the policy, but there has been a specific initiative from the government side to bring the geospatial sector into the mainstream discussion. For instance, Prime Minister's speech during the Independence Day had a mention of the geospatial potential in India has. Not just this, even the union budget talked about the geospatial sector and how we can commercialize it in the coming years. The authors project that if the commercial side of this business is exploited and the private sector is allowed to use this technology to its fullest, it might contribute 1 lakh crore rupees to India's GDP by 2029 and can show an annual growth rate of about 13%. There have been some positive signs in the past year. The authors here give a couple of examples. One, a company called Map My India that publishes different types of maps of India with extremely accurate information. These maps of Map My India are used by a lot of companies which are looking to deliver services to the people of India depending upon the different topography and the regions of the country. There are also companies such as Swiggy, Zomato, etc. that need to use the maps which are extremely accurate so that they can deliver services to their clients on time and with accuracy. This company, Map My India, released its IPO a few months back and received a great response from the market, resulting into oversubscription of the IPO. We also saw a private company called Genesis International that launched a city mapping program in the country. These two are the main takeaways of last 1 year in this particular sector. But still, the sector is still far away from the true potential that can be exploited in the Indian market. That is because apart from the policy that has been released, there are still a lot of hurdles that we need to go past. What are those hurdles? First, there is absence of a sizable geospatial market in India. Maybe the people and the commercial side of the business are unaware of the potential of the geospatial sector, because of which there is lack of demand on products which are linked to India's potential and size. Secondly, there is lack of skilled manpower. Not a lot of people have skills that are specifically required to work in this sector. There is also unavailability of foundation data. That means if you are launching any company in this field, it is one of those sectors where you need some initial data from the government side. It is the government of India that has data about how India's geography and topography has changed over the years. That official data from the government is not released to the private sector, which also becomes a hurdle. There is lack of clarity on data sharing. This is a very sensitive matter. For instance, if an organization is given the license by the government of India to publish India's maps and sell India's maps, the problem is, what if that particular company publishes a wrong map of India? What if that company, even by mistake, in its map shows one of India's districts to be a part of China or to be a part of Nepal, which can be an extremely touchy issue. That is why there's a lack of clarity on how those companies would be able to function with 100% accuracy, and how much data can be shared between different companies of this field, and how much data would the government share with the commercial companies. That is why this sector has still not taken off. For many years, there has been a very restrictive policy in this field. That is why many private companies could not enter it. The government departments have a lot of data which can be very useful to these companies. And as per the authors, those data should be unlocked and data sharing should be encouraged, specifically between the government and the private sector. There should be an open data sharing protocol where private and the public sector could pool in their data and each other's data could be used for better purposes. For instance, we should have the Indian National Digital Elevation Model, which has data of all the Indian cities, the data of natural resources of India, etc. All that should be made public so that any private organization wanting to enter this field or any private organization looking for extracting the mineral resources of India should have a clear idea of where and how many resources can they expect. Startups should be encouraged to enter this relatively new field which is still unexploited. In order to develop better skills in this area, the Indian government could also propose starting a bachelor's degree program in geospatial technology in the IITs and NITs across the country. Now, while the article does make mention of the new policy in 2021, it does not tell us what was the content of that policy and how did it change this sector. So let's go into detail of what new things were introduced in the 2021 policy. This was released by the Ministry of Science and Technology for geospatial sector in India and mainly deregulated the existing protocols, making it easier for the private sector to enter this field and publish maps and gather information about the topography and geography of India. The geospatial data that we are talking about includes any object, events or phenomena that have a location on the surface of the earth, which can include a specific location of a road, any earthquake event, where exactly did it take place, how to zero in on the area which was the epicenter. That can also include charting out areas where you see most children being malnutrition. That can also be dynamic. You can also track a moving vehicle, a moving pedestrian. All of that can be tracked and used using the same geospatial technology. As I said earlier, in the past decade, this geospatial data has become increasingly important in our daily life, with many day-to-day apps including Swiggy, Zomato, Flipkart, Amazon, Uber, etc. requiring the services of these apps so that they can effectively provide services to their customers. Before the 2021 policy, there were many state restrictions on how companies can collect this data, how can they store it, how can they sell it, etc. There was a lot of government control over the usage of this data. But the current regime has tried to deregulate it. Earlier, the private companies wanting to enter this sector had to take permission from multiple departments in order to ensure that they are not breaking any rule. The government specifically has been extremely careful about sharing such information, especially after the Kargil war. In fact, in the Kargil war, the government of India realized the importance of these kind of technologies, of having an accurate data of entire country point to point. That is why the government invested heavily in this sector after the Kargil war. Now, since the government is realizing that entry of the private sector would bring in more accurate technologies in this field, and that is why the sector is now being deregulated. The system of requiring licenses, permission, etc. could take months or years earlier, which led to delaying of projects in many kinds. With the 2021 policy, that has changed. The Indian companies now can self-attest and tell the government that we are following your guidelines, and they don't have to be monitored by any government agency. Self-attest means For example, if I am opening up the company, I will submit an affidavit saying that I have read all the rules and I am following all the rules of the government. If in a government inspection later on it is found out that I am not following the rules, then I will be penalized. But at least to begin the business, I don't have to wait for the government agencies to come, inspect everything, and then give me the license. So at least the beginning of the business can be in a much faster manner. Thus, the government is now putting a great deal of trust in the Indian private sector to enter into this field as well. The policy realized that if the government alone tries to cover the entire country and all its resources with high accuracy, it might take a lot of time. And therefore, it makes sense for the private sector to enter into this field and increase investment from the private sector into this particular area. Since the government is also focusing on data sharing, that means any new data found out by this private sector could be available to both the government and the private sector, and thus better policies and plans can be made for the future. The startups and businesses that will use this data in setting up their concerns will also increase employment in this sector for skilled people who have knowledge of this area. And thus, in the near future, we might see an Indian company making the most accurate map of India that could be used by Indian citizens in place of applications such as the Google Maps. The next article that we have here talks about the recent changes in the IAS cadre allocation policy. We have discussed about these things earlier as well in one of the CNAs where we discussed this issue in detail. Now, the authors here in this article are trying to make a point that the government is misinterpreting the problem. And the solution for the current problem of lack of IAS officers at the center government level is not a change in the cadre allocation policy. Rather, some other changes need to be made, which are mentioned in this article. Just to give you a brief recap of what we have studied earlier and what is the issue, every year, the state governments are required to submit a list of IAS officers to the central government who are interested in going for center government deputation so that the government of India can use the services of these IAS officers. The government of India says that over the years, this list has been decreasing and we don't have enough IAS officers at the center government level. So from now onwards, the center government is saying that we will decide which IAS officers would have to come to the center government level from the state without even asking for the permission of the state governments or that respective IAS officer. That was a controversial change in the IAS cadre allocation policy that was introduced specifically keeping in mind examples of West Bengal and Tamil Nadu, from where the list of officers given to the central government was decreasing year on year. As per the central government, they had to take this drastic step because of an acute shortage of mid-level IAS officers who usually work at the level of deputy secretaries or directors in a ministry. The authors here are trying to lift the layers of the problem and identify where exactly is the real source of the problem. The article says that the real cause of the shortage is because since 1991, the number of IAS officers that are recruited every year have declined considerably. Till 1991, we usually had 140 to 160 IAS officers joining the services every year, which has now declined to 50 to 80. That is because the government assumed that after we are liberalizing the economy, the role of the public sector would reduce and we would not need as many IAS officers as we are needing right now. This assumption of the government proved to be wrong, and there is still an increasing need of the IAS officers to work at the central government. As per government's own data, as of 1st Jan 2021, the shortage of IAS officers was 23%. So for every 100 posts that had to be occupied by IAS officers, we only had 77 people for those posts. Thus, the immediate solution is not to get IAS officers from the state forcefully, but to increase the number of IAS officers recruited each year to at least 200 for the next few years to fill in the gap. Apart from reducing the number of IAS officers recruited by the central government each year, the authors here have given multiple causes of the existing problem. As per the authors, the second cause of the problem is inefficient cadre review. Now, cadre review means that the center and the state governments jointly decide that at the state government level, there would be some positions that would only and only be occupied by IAS officers. Usually, the important positions at the state government level are included in this cadre review, so that IAS officers at the state level only occupy those positions. But over the years, we have seen many positions at the state level, which may not be very significant, are included under the cadre review. Means states now require more IAS officers even for those positions which might not be very important. An example given in this article is that in Tamil Nadu, posts such as Commissioner of Disciplinary Proceedings, Commissioner of Archaeology, Commissioner of Museums are those posts which can only be occupied by IAS officers. Now, without undermining the importance of the post, the authors here make a point that these posts can also be handled by state PCS officers and they don't have to be occupied by IAS officers only. So, a review of that policy might also free up many more IAS officers that can go ahead and take central deputation. Also, the government of India must try to downsize the central ministries, specifically those that are working on the state list and the concurrent list subjects. That will also free up IAS officers for more important positions. The third cause for this problem, as per the authors, is the government of India since 2000 has discontinued direct recruitment of officers to Central Secretariat Service Group B. Because of the involvement of the Supreme Court also in this issue, there have been multiple delays in the promotion of the officers from the rank in the Central Secretariat. These officers who would have joined in the Group B service and would have been promoted later would have been the one who would have held these posts such as Deputy Secretary and Director, which are now lying vacant. So the government of India must sort this as well. The next cause, as per the authors, is not utilizing the services of those officers who are promoted to the IAS from their PCS positions. As you know, a lot of state civil servants, after completing 10 or more years in their services, are promoted to the level of the IAS officers. Those are about 2,250 officers right now, but for some reason, the central government does not use their services to the fullest. The authors say that these are the officers who are usually in their 35 to 40, 45 age group and have a lot of experience of working on the ground, and that is why their services could be used at the level of deputy secretaries or directors. Next, the authors say that the government itself has made a lot of rules because of which the central deputation of the officers becomes extremely difficult. For example, even when the state governments give a list to the central government of IAS officers for central deputation, such lists are only for annual purposes. And at the end of the year, those lists lapse and a new list is asked for. That system needs to be changed. One list of officers can continue for multiple years as per the author. Now, apart from the solutions that the authors have given above, the authors also suggest a few other solutions. For example, all the IAS officers that are recruited by the government of India through the UPSC Civil Services Examinations, for all of them, it should be mandatory to serve for at least 3 years on central deputation between 9 to 25 years of their service. So you should allow them to choose when they want to come to the center, but they should have to come to the center for at least 3 years, if not more. Now you might ask, why do the officers don't want to come at the center level and want to remain at the state level? There can be many reasons for that. One of the reasons can be that at the state government level, it is easier to rise up the ranks, and since there are lesser IAS officers at the state level, you might have a chance to stand out and make an impact at a faster level. Also, there is a perception that while working at the state government level, the IAS officer would have more power in their hand as compared to when they go to the center government level, because at the center government level, they mostly would have to give all their powers to the secretaries of the ministries. That is why most IAS officers are not really keen on central deputation. So the suggestion is they should come to central deputation for at least 3 years. Otherwise, they would not be promoted to the level of principal secretary at the state level. They should be allowed to choose whenever they want to come to the center level between 9 and 25 years of their service. The authors conclude by saying that rather than forcing new rules on the state governments at a time when the center state elections anyways are not going through a very good time, it is important to use constitutional methods such as have a meeting of interstate council between all the states and the center, and then decide on how can we actually improve the situation and give a solution to this existing problem of shortage of IAS officers at the center. Now, since the article makes a mention of the interstate council and how it can be used, it is important for us to revise that concept. Article 263 of the Indian Constitution says that the interstate council can be established for effective coordination between the center government and the state governments. This is not a permanent body. It is on the President of India to establish such a council at any time that appears fit for him in the interest of the public. Although the president can give any topic of discussion to this council, the constitution also says that there are some topics that should be discussed in the council. That is, to advise on the disputes that arise between center and the state, investigate those matters where center and the state have a common interest, and have discussions on policy making for the future. The Interstate Council has Prime Minister as the chairman. It has Chief Ministers of all the states, Chief Ministers of Union Territories also that have Legislative Assembly, administrators of other union territories. Then, if there is any state that is under president's rule, they would be represented by the governor. It would also have 6 central ministers, including the Home Minister, while the other 5 would be nominated by the Prime Minister. Now, although the Constitution of India gives this platform for the central and the state governments to come together and discuss important issues, the problem remains that there are hardly any meetings held. In fact, this council has only met 12 times so far. That is why it has not been extremely effective in sorting out issues between the center and the state. The council was supposed to meet thrice a year, and the decisions of the council are decided by a consensus, but they meet so rarely that they don't really have an impact on improving the center state relation. The last interstate council meeting was held in 2017 only. The supposed benefits of such a council is that it is the only multilateral center state forum that has been given in the constitution itself, where we can discuss a whole range of topics between the center and the state, but unfortunately it has remained underutilized. The limitations of the council again are the fact that it is just a recommendatory body and it is not binding on the government to have continuous meetings, which is why we rarely see meetings of the Interstate Council. The next article that we have focuses on LIC's IPO, which has been in the news for a long time now, in fact for more than a couple of years, and now it's finally happening. The article here discusses the pros and cons of the IPO for both the investors and the policy holders. The background story is that the government of India has decided to sell 5% stakes in the LIC for at least 60,000 crore rupees. Remember, this is not privatization of LIC. The government would still hold 95% stake. Only 5% stake of the LIC is being sold in the share market. Now, LIC is one of the largest government companies and earns huge profits year after year. How does the LIC earn profit? Number one, they take money from the policy holders in the form of premium. If they have to pay back the policy holder, in that case, if they charge a higher premium and paid back lesser money, that is their first source of profit. Second, LIC collects lakhs and crores of rupees every single year from the policy holders, and that money is invested into stocks, government bonds, and other investment products, which also earn profit to the LIC. In fact, it manages about 37 lakh crore rupees in the assets, and every 3 out of 4 insurance policies in India right now are policies that are given by the LIC. In the financial year 2022, it posted a net profit of 1,437 crores, and interestingly, most of that profit was actually given back to the policy holders in some kind or the other. This is where the debate begins. That is, now that LIC would have outside investors also, they would want that the LIC profit is given to them and not the policy holders. So either the policy holders will get more money or the shareholders will get more money. How exactly to strike a balance between the two is a big issue now. LIC currently pays only 5% of its profit to the government, and 95% of its profit is either reinvested back into the company, like in the form of ads and introducing new policies, or it is given to the policy holders in the form of bonuses. That is why the policy holders are worried. That is, the investors would want that they would get profit now, but the shareholders would want that their profit distribution as bonuses should continue. In fact, multiple reports suggest that by financial year 2025, the share of LIC's profit that is distributed to policyholders would drop from 95% to 90%. This is an assumption. Now, if you know about LIC, you would realize the fact that if you compare the returns of LIC policies as compared to private sectors, the LIC policy returns are usually lower as compared to private sector. But still, as we just saw, 3 out of every 4 life insurance in India actually belongs to the LIC. Now, why is that? That is because the people invest in LIC despite low returns because it is backed by the government of India, because it has a sovereign guarantee. That is, no matter what, the money in LIC will not be dead. That is what the people's belief is, and so far that belief has stayed very strong. But once the investors come into the picture, that return might fall down even further. And that will be a big test for the supporters of the LIC. There is the other side also that supports the IPO. Those people say that the policyholders must understand that while the proportion of the profit given to them as a bonus might decline, but when the LIC actually has private investors, the LIC's method of working would improve. That is, right now LIC invests most of its money in the government bonds, so they earn a low interest. Now, when the private investors come in, they might encourage the LIC to invest more money in the private market and they can earn a higher profit, and that is why the bonuses of the policyholders would be higher. The second point that supporters of IPO are making is because government owned LIC 100%, till now the government had been misusing the powers of the LIC and used it as a piggy bank for whenever they wanted to buy any company that was making a loss, LIC was used. For example, LIC was forced to purchase the IDBI bank, although it did not really make any business sense. LIC also had to invest money in DHFL, Reliance Capital, etc., when they were not making a lot of profit because the government wanted it to happen that way. Now that LIC becomes a part of the public domain, now that it is listed in the stock exchange, activities of the LIC would be under much more scrutiny. There is one other point that we don't really realize. LIC is by far one of the largest investors in India's stock market. In fact, it is said that the market fluctuations actually play to the strength of LIC because LIC makes a lot of profit from these market fluctuations. Because LIC is not listed in the stock exchange, they don't really publicize their numbers, and there is still a lot of secrecy about how LIC invests in the stock market, those thousands and crores of rupees that they have. Now, the assumption is that once LIC becomes a company that is listed on the stock exchange, their numbers, their balance sheets would become public, and the people would get to know how exactly is the LIC managing the Indian market. Because it is said that the people might not know this, but most of the things that happen in the Indian market are actually controlled by the LIC alone because it has so much money and it invests a huge part of that money in the Indian stock market. Now, because this is one of the largest government companies to enter the stock market, there are multiple implications of the LIC IPO. In financial year 2018, LIC said that they have about 31 lakh crore under their asset management. Now, as I said, once they become public, it would lead to much more disclosures of how the LIC is investing this money, how much loan are they giving to people, and how much money do they have in the bank, which will lead to much greater transparency and accountability, which is always good for the economy. Till now, government has used the LIC as their milch cow. That is, whenever they wanted to buy any company, whether is it making a profit or a loss, doesn't matter. They just push the LIC to do that. We just discussed the example of IDBI and how the bad loans of the IDBI were bailed out just because of the LIC. On an average, LIC invests 55,000 to 65,000 crore rupees in the stock market every year, and that is how it decides how the stock market will run. But we don't have any information about where they invest this money. And this move will make it much more transparent now for the people to understand the working of the LIC. There are arguments against the LIC IPO also from those people mainly who think that LIC anyway is by far one of the most efficient government organizations and there is no greater need for transparency. These people say that LIC invests a lot of money in the government bonds and securities, thus helping in the process of nation building. Government's initiatives such as housing, irrigation, roads, etc. are all sponsored because the LIC is buying government bonds in huge numbers. When the government announces in the budget that we are increasing capital expenditure, we will borrow money from the market, where are they going to? They are going to companies such as LIC only, which is buying government bonds, giving the money to the government to increase their capital expenditure. LIC already is extremely transparent and is a very efficiently managed institution. They give their monthly report to the IRDAI, which also places it in the parliament for scrutiny. In fact, there is no guarantee that when a company becomes listed in the stock market, it becomes more transparent and more efficient. There are many listed companies who have gone bankrupt. There are multiple examples, including the Yes Bank, Lakshmi Vilas Bank, DHFL, etc. In fact, around the world, if you see other insurance companies, you would see that except LIC, many big insurance companies have had troubles in their working. Take an example of AIG, that is a major US insurance company. which faced a very bad situation after 2008-9 economic crisis when people were asking for a lot of claims. AIG had to be bailed out by the US government by pumping lakhs and crores of rupees. In fact, in the US, many insurance companies refused to accept any claims after the 9/11 attack, saying that we don't have enough money. How can we give claims to so many people? We need the help of the government. This kind of a situation has never happened in India. LIC and other PSUs have always given claims to the people for any calamity, including the earthquakes, cyclones, tsunamis, etc. In fact, LIC on an average settles 99.86% claims, which is one of the highest in the world anywhere. And they do all of that without any extra help from the government. That is why there is no need to change what is not broken right now. And any effort to make changes in the working of the LIC would only be detrimental to the country's economy. The government must realize that there are only 2% of India's population who is investing in the share market. So for their benefit, the government cannot overlook the benefit of 130 crore people who are looking at LIC as a primary policy issuer. Thus, the interest of the policyholders must be given a priority over the interest of the shareholders as per this argument. Just a couple of graphs to show you how big the LIC is and how big is their market share. As you can see, these are the top global insurers worldwide. LIC has a kind of a monopoly in the Indian market. It has almost close to 65% of the share in the Indian market. Compare it with other companies which are leading their countries, such as the Aviva in UK has about 22 to 23% share, Nippon in Japan 20% share, but no other company comes even close to the kind of monopoly that LIC has enjoyed in the Indian market, and it has never betrayed the trust of the people. The next article that we have talks about the unresolved issue between the Indian and the Sri Lankan fishermen. This is an issue that has been going on for a very long time, and we have also discussed it in the earlier CNAs as well. The issue comes to the news again because the Sri Lankan Navy has again arrested 12 Indian fishermen from the Rameswaram district and also seized 2 of their fishing boats on charges that they had entered into the Sri Lankan waters and were undertaking illegal fishing activities. Now, the issue specifically is not the latest one that has happened in the past year or so. In fact, the biggest confrontation between the two sides took place when a few weeks back there was an escalation between fishermen following the death of 2 Jaffna fishermen. Now, it is interesting to note that on one hand, the relationship between India and Sri Lanka is improving at the center government to center government level, where India is offering continuous support to Sri Lanka in the ongoing financial crisis. On the other hand, the fishermen issue remains unresolved between the two sides despite various consultations and various meetings held between the two sides. Just 10 days back, the fishermen in the Jaffna province of Sri Lanka, which is on the northern part of Sri Lanka, held a large protest demanding that there should be strict implementation of the Sri Lankan laws and the Indian fishermen should not be allowed to carry out fishing activities on the other side of their border. Now, to understand the issue between the two sides, the issue is regarding the water body that is a Palk Strait. Let me show you the map. Now, this is the Palk Strait. The dotted line that you see is the agreed international maritime boundary between the two sides. Fishermen from Tamil Nadu and from Puducherry in India, because they have already exploited a lot of resources from the Indian sides, intentionally or intentionally move towards the Sri Lankan side. And this is where the problem begins. Jaffna, which is the northern part of Sri Lanka, the fishermen here have been complaining against the Indian fishermen coming to their side using large trawlers, exhausting all the resources from the Sri Lankan side, and thus it is a matter of livelihood for the Jaffna fishermen. Now, as you could see, the strait begins just north of Sri Lanka's Jaffna province and is about 100 kilometers wide at its widest point. It is rich in marine resources, especially the shrimp. The two sides agreed to have a boundary line in 1970s called the International Maritime Boundary Line. That is a dotted line that I just showed you. Indian fishermen, however, are very frequently arrested by the Sri Lankan Navy for coming to the Sri Lankan side of the waters. Now, the main contention is about the kind of fishing activities taken up by the Indian fishermen, which is called bottom trawling. This is a fishing method used by the fishermen in Tamil Nadu and requires large trawling ships which utilize huge nets to reach till the bottom of the sea. They primarily target fish species, shrimps, etc. Now, because they reach till the bottom surface, they even scoop out eggs, young fishes which are not really commercially viable for the fishermen because they want big fishes, and other marine organisms which eventually die and then are thrown back into the sea. The Sri Lankan fishermen, on the other hand, have their own problems. Till 2009, because of the ongoing bloody civil war in Sri Lanka, most fishermen in Jaffna were not allowed to go ahead and undertake fishing activities in the Palk state. Only after 2009, when the situation normalized, the Jaffna fishermen were allowed to undertake fishing activities in that area. But then they realized that it was a common practice for the Indian fishermen to come on the Sri Lankan side. And since the Indian fishermen had more resources, bigger boats, better technology, they were the ones who were winning this competition of getting more fishes as compared to the Sri Lankan fishermen. Not just this, the Tamil Nadu fishing community is much wealthier and politically extremely influential, having connections till the union government in India. The Sri Lankan fishermen, on the other hand, since most of them come from the minority Tamil community in Sri Lanka, don't get a lot of support from the government of Sri Lanka. The things escalated last year when 5 Indian fishermen returned home dead when they were attacked by the Sri Lankan Navy because they had entered into the Sri Lankan side. In fact, one of these 5 was actually a Sri Lankan who was living in India for a long time. The union government has been trying to divert the fishermen in Tamil Nadu and use environmentally more friendly fishing methods, but that has not worked. There's also one interesting point of view here. During the civil war in Sri Lanka, when a lot of Tamilians were killed by the Sri Lankan government, and Jaffna, being the hub of the Tamil population in Sri Lanka, was under attack by the Sri Lankan army, the Jaffna people were mostly supported by Tamil Nadu only. So while the people in Jaffna have a soft corner for the support that the Tamil Nadu government had given to them earlier, now they have to choose between their historical partners and their existing livelihood. So while the Jaffna fishermen repeatedly acknowledge Tamil Nadu's solidarity and support during the civil war in Sri Lanka, but now it is a matter of life and death for them. This is a pictorial representation to show you how exactly does bottom trawling impact the fishing resources in the particular sea. While Sri Lankan boats can only extract resources up till this depth of the sea, the Indian trawlers, which are much more costlier, much more advanced, can go till the bottom and also harms the marine life in the Palk State area. Despite various face to face consultations between the representatives of the two sides, the issue, which is decades old, has not been resolved even now. The next article that we have comes from Rajasthan, where the Rajasthan government is all set to resume the riverbed sand mining after the Supreme Court had banned the sand mining activities about 4 years ago. After the latest environmental clearance, now about 60 mining areas in Rajasthan will see sand mining activities resume after about 4 years. In 2017, the Supreme Court had appointed a central empowered committee to look into the issue of illegal sand mining because it had a lot of environmental concerns and was leading to a lot of criminal activities in the state. As you know, sand is an essential component of constructions of all kinds. It is mixed with cement for construction of buildings, and because of the Supreme Court order in 2017, the supply of sand had reduced drastically. It had two impacts. Number one, the cost of sand went up because there were only limited supply available. And secondly, it led to a lot of delay in the construction projects. Because of which, in November last year, the Supreme Court finally accepted the recommendation of the Central Empowered Committee and allowed the riverbed sand mining only after all the environmental clearances and taxes have been paid by the party. Now, the issue of illegal sand mining is spread across the country. It is a very prevalent exercise, especially in the Garo Hills of Meghalaya, the Satluj Basin in Punjab, Yamuna in Delhi, so on and so forth. It is not just in India, but across the world, sand is a very sought after commodity. In fact, a United Nations study calculates that humankind's total consumption of sand is more than 40 billion tons in a year, which is double the number of sediments which is replenished naturally by the earth. Thus, the reserves of sand across the world are declining. In India, sand is classified as a minor mineral under the Mines and Minerals Act of 1957. Sand is consumed as a natural resource for making bricks, concrete, mortar, glass, paint, and even paved roads. Now, the other question you might have is, riverbed is not the only place from where you can get sand. However, river sand is always preferred over the desert sand. Basically, because the grains of the desert sand are too rounded and thus they cannot be used as industrial binding agents. And that is why the marine sand is always preferred, leading to a lot of illegal activities on the riverbeds. Because of these illegal sand mining activities, there have been multiple implications on the environment. It has led to alteration of the rivers. It has also led to damaging of the river biodiversity and even alter the sediment budget. Realizing the importance of sand mining in the country, there have been multiple regulations made for this. As I said, sand is a minor mineral, and that is why different state governments have made different rules for awarding, regulating, and administering how the sand will be taken out. In order to curb illegal mining, there have been multiple judicial interventions as well from the side of the Supreme Court, as the one that we saw in case of Rajasthan. Even the NGT, the National Green Tribunal, passed an award in 2013 banning sand mining without proper environmental clearance. Since the government is concerned about these activities, the Ministry of Mines has developed a mining surveillance system to use space technology for facilitating the state governments to curb illegal mining activities across the country. There is also a penalty for extracting sand without a legal permit across the country. These were the important articles from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, discuss the implications of government's decision to sell a stake in the LIC. How would it impact the market? Second, what potential does India's geospatial sector hold in invigorating India's job market? What steps are required to be taken in that direction? Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.